welcome to this class. So I promised I would deliver more seascapes and boats too. So this is going to be our next class here. So I want to show you my quick test piece. I did it on a smaller sheet. I do recommend making it larger. This is cold pressed watercolor paper, but for this one I decided to try with the rough watercolor paper, which has more texture, means I will have a little more opportunity for that dry brushing. So there's some dry brushing over the boat, but overall the sky and the water were painted wet on wet. This is all, the boat is wet on dry. I have not removed the masking fluid yet, but this is another thing we need to do. So when you take a look at the reference image, the boat itself has some nice highlights. It would be nice to cover it or mask it with the masking fluid for watercolors. Another thing, when you look at the reflections over the water, so we can see that part that's just so white. Why don't we just use masking fluid for this part? This way we don't have to worry about trying to lift the colors later, because we could not really preserve those areas if we just stayed away, because we need to have that freedom of movement when we have that brush and we apply colors wet on wet. I painted the water a little bit differently compared to the reference, and I'm also not adding the buildings in the background. I just want the clean sky in there. So first thing is masking fluid for watercolors. I use very old brushes I don't care about, and I do suggest using old brushes so you don't damage your nice brushes. So some of my older brushes are like, let's see, I have this Princeton's Heritage. That's what I'm gonna use for as the rigger one if I need like longer strokes. So just make sure you wash your brush afterwards, even though it's an old brush, because that masking will not come off. I had a little piece, fortunately it came off. So this is Schmincke's blue masking fluid I like to use. It's water-based. So first, let's see, I'm gonna dip my brush slightly in water. Let's see, a little bit of that masking here, and I need to flatten the brush actually. So I have a nice line over, so right on top of the boat you will see this white rim. That's exactly what I'm covering. With the masking, I mean, you're doing it so you don't have to worry about lifting later, because I'd say like it would be too hard to preserve these spots unless you paint it all. Well, we will be painting it wet on dry, yes, but it's still a little hard to preserve all these little tiny lines and so on. When you go over the motor here for the boat, just kind of don't cover the whole thing, just parts of it. And then we have like little elements here and there, and then right here this post. Steady hand all the way to the top. There you go. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's just so you have some whites here and there, and then maybe a couple dots. What else we have here? This maybe line just not all the way, just a little bit. Now I want to really start working on these reflections. So first you have a reflection from the dark part of the boat, and then that red part, the paint, but then right below that we have this reflection. So it's kind of, as you see, like a kind of twisty line, right? So I'm gonna see more on my reference there. I grabbed the rigger as well, but I don't think I need a rigger brush for this. Now you have to think about the perspective, so these lines become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And maybe here, this is the part that I really need to preserve actually. Otherwise, I won't have any of these whites on my paper once the paper dries. So again, I didn't remove it from my test piece yet, and I will, and I'll see how white it looks. Sometimes the whiteness from the masking just doesn't look as good. It's just too much, but we can also use wax stick, and I love using wax stick. Here, by the way, there's another reflection coming from this motor. So I'm just gonna add some of this here. And then let's see what else. I could add a little bit of that here. It's just a smaller reflection, and overall maybe here. Something like that. I'm not gonna use too much of it. Maybe a little more over the boat, like smaller accents. But I just want it a little bit, just so it's easier to go about the sailboat. Now I am going to quickly clean the brush. So what we're gonna do is start working on the sky. We're gonna paint the sky wet on wet. So wet it first, up to the horizon line, apply colors wet on wet. Next, we are going to wet right underneath the horizon line. So I suggest wait till the sky is 100% dry and then you start wetting the bottom parts of the sea, because otherwise it's easy to just create a balloon. But I'm probably gonna go through like pretty quickly, or not quickly, but I'll start working on the water right away. So to make it more simple, I am going to just focus here on the sky only. We're gonna wet it and apply colors wet on wet. Now for the sky, I have phthalo blue, manganese blue nova, and some cobalt turquoise light. Plus I'm gonna use some yellow and red to change the shade, but I also want to create those clouds on top. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start applying a little bit the colors for the clouds. So yellow, blue, red, primary colors. And then underneath I'm going to start adding colors for the sky, the blue sky. And that's just going to be like a blend of the phthalo blue, manganese, cobalt turquoise light. Let's keep in mind that the sky on top is the most intense, the colors, then we have those clouds, and then becomes more pale, right? So in this area right above the horizon line, it should have like, the blue should have a little bit of red, more red in it actually, because that's when it becomes more hazy there. So let's start wetting the paper. I'm gonna cover up here this part so I don't get any water there. And let's start wetting, and when we wet, we are not touching the sailboat because we don't want any of that paint to go there. The way we're going to apply colors, so away from the sailboat, and that's how we're going to actually shape it too at the same time. That's how you can change the shape of it. Well, you don't want to change the shape. It's better just to stick with the sketch. But here I go, right next. If you worry about going over the boat, just stay away from it, and then once you have a color, you can get closer toward the boat, because then you will know how close you are once you have a color. Because sometimes, like when I wet, I actually don't see how far I'm going with all the lights, especially. But take your time wetting, because the more time you wet the paper, the more time you're gonna have to apply the colors wet on wet. And I'm gonna get a little closer here. I don't want to pass the horizon line for sure, because that means the color will bleed there as well. So I just have to have a steady hand using the angle, the side of a brush actually. This is my flat 24 Casanel brush. Spreading the water. This is a rough watercolor paper. If you are new or somewhat new, I still suggest using cold pressed watercolor paper. Rough has a lot of texture and the paint does spread more faster. So it's a little different compared to the cold pressed. But the advantage is that you have a nice more texture. You do have texture with cold pressed, but with rough you have even more. I have a little something there, fuzzy part. I don't want that. No, it's back. Yeah, got it out. Let's see. If for some reason I have some of that fuzziness in there, I'm just gonna leave it, and I will remove it once the paper dries, because it's very difficult to remove hair or anything from that nice smooth layer without disturbing the smooth layer. So it's just better to leave it. So let's see, I'm gonna push these brushes more on the side. I'm going to grab my other brush. This is my long quill size 4, and I'm dipping it in water. What I'm gonna do is grab some of this Imidazzle yellow, my yellow, Quinacridone red, phthalo blue. But I need to first actually mix that phthalo blue more with the red and then go for the yellow. Otherwise, it's just the colors can easily become muddy. I want more of the blue, so I'm grabbing more blue for the clouds, and maybe I want to show actually more yellow. So that's why you don't want to mix colors on the paper. I'm sorry, on the palette. You can see the separation of colors. So it's like I'm going from one side to another wherever I want to grab that color from, or the blend, whatever I can get from there. And I want to change the shade, so I want a little more blue with it. And then I'm going to go this direction here. So I'm just creating these bigger clouds, which is why I have a larger brush. So it's a little larger than my long quill size 2, because I want to cover more area right away. Now that's just these clouds, right? What I need to do is clean this brush and then grab my flat brush again, because now I want that smooth blue sky. So I'm going to grab more. This was more like a milk-like ratio. Now I'm going to grab more like a, let's see, like a, I guess like a between milk and half, because this part, I don't want this to spread right now too much. I do want these more intense colors. All the blues I have plus red, and going right underneath the clouds. Right underneath the clouds, shaping my clouds this way. I'm going to wipe my brush on a towel because I have too much water. Another thing is, what you want to pay attention to is that water and paint on the side of your block, because that will cause the paint to climb back up onto the surface of your paper. And that's not good. That's never good. I'm gonna grab more of the phthalo blue and more Quinn red, because the sky, the blue is more intense, like right underneath these clouds. So when you go in there, that's how you can shape the clouds, and go inside too, like this. The paint is still moving and spreading, that's the thing, and you can control a lot of it. If you wipe your brush on a towel, you don't have too much of that paint and water on your brush in general. I want to grab more of that manganese blue nova, and I have the cobalt turquoise light plus a little bit of that red. Change the shade of it, make it pretty. And I'm getting closer toward the bottom here, so I need to start thinking about having less and less paint, just so the sky feels more like lighter, and with some of that red I mentioned. Now I am right next to the boat, so I grabbed a little more water. This is a little too much. I cleaned my brush, wiped it, and then I'm going back here, but this is too much water. What I need to do is grab some of this paint from here and then kind of drag it down, so I just don't have overall too much of that paint and water. But I do need to go close to the boat, because again, this is how I am shaping my boat, right? And now, nice smooth strokes. Nice smooth strokes from left to right, but then I gotta go back again just to shape the boat. Now, I'm not crazy about the sky, so what I'm gonna do is go back and add a little more color, just like this. So grabbing this phthalo blue, the manganese, quinacridone red, and coming back with a heavy cream-like ratio between water and paint. So the ratio between water and paint is much heavier, and I want to have more control. I don't want to create blooms. And then just kind of quick strokes and pushing that paint. And I still want to work a little bit more on the clouds, so I'm not like completely done. So for now, I have a little bit of that sky. What I need to do is grab some of this blend, maybe of the grays, and just to have it on the bottom right there. And that makes a little more sense now. But I'm not done with the clouds, so I'm cleaning my brush, wiping it on a towel, and I'm gonna grab that same larger quill brush, the long quill, and grab, but this time like a heavy cream of the red, the yellow, and some of this blue. But again, it's better to mix the blue with the red before separately. So now I'm gonna actually add more shadows to my clouds. It has to be more like a either heavy cream or cream top-like ratio between water and paint. Otherwise, you can easily create bloom. Number one reason is because you're adding new paint and water, more water, and actually I'm gonna focus on this part. We do need, before this dries, you want to also add some clouds in here, right? So be careful with coming back to the areas that already started to dry, because it's super easy to create that bloom. So just keep an eye on everything. I'm grabbing a little more of that mixture. Every time you grab that paint from the palette, don't grab any new water, just go with this. And if it feels too diluted with water, wipe your brush on a towel. Try to grab a little thicker paint overall. So where else do I want some clouds? I'm gonna wipe now the brush on a towel, and then I'm just gonna go back. I didn't clean it, so technically I still have some paint there. I'm gonna grab this thicker paint and just go back there. Now, a little bit of work, not too much, because if you just keep working on these clouds too much, the areas start to look overworked. And don't forget to leave light over these clouds. Now, another thing what I could do is actually lift a little bit, because here I didn't like leave those area alone when I was applying the blues, the shades of blues. Instead, I just kept going with that sky color, the blues, and we can do the same thing here. I normally don't lift, I just kind of stay away from the areas, but here I'm kind of still, I guess, figuring out the composition in general. So now we're going to move on toward the bottom of the painting. I grabbed the paper towel and I removed the excess of paint from each side, because this just happens too often where I have the paint and water climbing back up toward the sides of the paper. I guess the best way to avoid that issue is using a washi tape, and this way, like, you protect the sides. Now let's start working on the water. So this is what we can do. We're gonna wet it, and if you want to, first of all, you can leave that to dry first, but what you could do is wet it like up to here, and then start with dry brushing until the paint, or till you connect the areas. So a little bit of water, and then on top you can do some dry brushing, or just go right underneath the horizon line. But the best thing you can do really is to wait until the paper is 100% dry, and then you don't have to worry about like water spills or anything like that, or droplets going over there. So now I have to be super careful because of that. Now, make sure you have your colors ready to go and you have enough of that color, because we're going to paint this water wet on wet. And the way it works is, so you want to start with the lighter colors here, overall everything lighter, and then it becomes all more intense on the bottom. And that's when the ripples become larger and larger and larger. To have the most control, you don't want any pools of water on top of the paper, so you got to be careful with that. Here, this is the boat, so I'm actually very careful here. We're gonna paint the boat last and the reflections, so we don't have to worry about it yet. There you go. So go through a few times through this these areas, just so the paper stays wet longer. If you are doing what I'm doing, so you're not waiting for this to dry, just be very careful so no water just drips down there, or otherwise you're just gonna have a bloom in the sky. So I'm almost ready. A little more water, just one more time. Once you're ready, just push it down, that water, so you don't have too much, or just remove it a little bit with that brush. All right, I am going to start actually with, let's see, which brush? My round 8, there it is. Because of that dry brushing, and I'm just gonna grab, like, this is like red, blue, and yellow. And I'm just gonna dry brush closer toward the horizon line, and that solves the issue, right? Right away. Like, I don't have to wait for that to dry. And then closer toward the boat here, there's that person there. There you go. So I have that first lighter tone overall. And some dry brushing. So that's the easier way to connect the two. And then right next to that boat, we do want color. So we can show there's a boat. The sailboat. All right. So now I'm going to grab my wider brush, which is my 24 flat size brush. And we're gonna make it lighter overall, like these areas compared to like this part, the foreground. You can drop some blue. I wipe my brush on a towel because I have a little too much, but you can drop blue also where you just finished dry brushing. And then we have the reflections here, right? So we have to think about the reflections. Now, I have way too much water on the bottom here. And that's just the recipe for a disaster. So I just need to quickly wipe this a little bit. And now back to my beautiful colors. I love the Manganese Blue Nova and then a little bit of Quinacridone Red. Let's just keep going down because we need that shade overall to start with. And then the blues, a little red. Even if it's too much of that red, it's still okay. We don't have to paint anything exactly like we see in the reference. That's the thing. It's a painting, it's up to you, and it's actually really nice to have some reds in there to show those reds. Change the reference just the way you want it. We are going to add some darks in a second. We also have, for these reflections, we should actually use a color, and I suggest using yellow, blue, red, because that will give you a shade of gray. I need way more water for this. Red and yellow plus my blue. I always do this, I mix the colors too fast together. You want to show actually there's yellow. So I grab some more yellow. I even want more yellow. And I'm just gonna add it like right here where I have these parts. Just this way, instead of like staying away from it, I have some color, and I can lift too if I want to, but the idea is to have some color, especially on this side, more color here. And then we can focus after this on just the water. Now the water is not done, right? So let's go back and grab some of these colors again. So this is my cobalt, turquoise, manganese, and then the phthalo blue. So the water. The ripples would be way larger here in the foreground. Now I'm not gonna really go exactly like I see in the reference because I prefer to do a little bit different. I'm gonna squeeze more color, definitely more color, cobalt turquoise and cobalt turquoise light and manganese blue nova. So there's my two blues. There's the blue, phthalo blue, and we can still keep grabbing this beautiful quinacridone red. The ripples again are much larger in the foreground, and you can really make it big as long as you don't connect all the pieces. Okay, so you need to show the movement. Now the water is pretty still in the reference. That doesn't mean that we have to make it still like that. I actually like to show some movement, but keep in mind these ripples, they would be larger in the foreground. So I grabbed a little too much paint here. That's okay. There you go. I'm just going to make this one much larger. And now you want to start grabbing less and less water with that paint. So I didn't even dip my brush in water. There you go. And now the ripples become smaller and smaller and smaller as we get closer toward the boat. I'm just using the flat side of that brush. Actually, you can see the paint. And then we can get really close here too. The paint is not diluted on my brush enough, but I'll be very careful. You can get really close toward these reflections and very small ripples as we get closer toward the boat. We are going to come back here. We have to come back here because this is otherwise going to spread too much. especially on my paper because I am using this rough watercolor paper. I'm gonna wipe my brush on a towel so it's kind of damp, and I know I have paint on my brush, so I'm just gonna create a couple more of these ripples, especially like getting closer here. And then I should add a little bit in between, just because that's what I see also in the reference. But how do we control all this so it's not spreading too much, so it's a little darker too? You want to grab more like a heavy cream to cream top-like ratio between water and paint of the same colors, and you just keep adding it with a damp brush. So wipe your brush on a towel so it feels squished, and you can even add darker tone, and I just grab indigo. And then you just keep adding it and adding it. So of course we have these ripples and we have reflections, so you kind of want to match some things to that reference so we're not too far away from it. But I do want to overall create some more movement over the water. I'm gonna grab more of the colors. This is the damp brush, and it's kind of like you're going back toward those same areas that you just applied color, except here maybe, but you're going back to kind of polish it. And I'm not grabbing any new water. So if you look at it, there's actually some green in there. But if you look at it, it's just a damp brush with that drier paint. So that's how I can keep this under control. And that's okay now, like I'm okay with it. But I need to work more on these reflections in the middle. And I want a little more darks. So I grabbed maybe a little too much of that indigo, but I will go with it and see what happens. Because all this should be much larger the ripples and everything, because again, this is the foreground and that's the background. I'm gonna grab a little more of this paint. And I don't want to do this forever, like just keep going through. At some point I'm just gonna leave it. It's just that I want to show that movement. And I do have a class, by the way. It's just water, I think that's what it was, and it's actually very good because I've seen your paintings after the class, and if you haven't taken that class, I do recommend taking the class. It's about painting the ripples, and it will help you too to understand like the process. But quickly, before this is too dry, I want to grab some of this blue and maybe some of this Van Dyke brown, maybe too much of the blues, more of the Van Dyke brown, and just to show these darker reflections for the boat. But you know what, it needs way more of the browns. And then you kind of go on the inside, whatever you see the brown spots, not too much, it can quickly get too muddy. This is like a mix-up of colors. This is my round 8 golden 2, by the way. And you can go like add colors toward the areas you haven't added yet. Now this is a perfect example what happens like if I have that water on the edge of on the bottom of the paper, and this is a block. It's just that water is causing blooms. So I quickly have to go back and get rid of this water. It's like the water just doesn't have, or paint doesn't have a way to go anywhere. But I'm gonna squish the brush, what I was just using, and smooth it quickly before that blooms just, takes over completely. So I can do this, the only reason I can do this is because I'm doing this with a damp brush and the paper is still wet. I need to clean this quickly, clean it, and put it away. And again, focus on those reflections. If I want to add any more to it, this is the time to do it. And I am going to add some reflections wet on dry as well. It's just right now, this is more like a priority to add some more to it here. More blue maybe with it. More blue, and this is like a cream top, almost like a drier brush. That's all this is. These are the areas that I already worked on. So the last thing I can do is, I guess, add maybe some reflections here if this is still wet. And I will be adding more reflections, wet on dry again. I could have some of these ripples here, but the color is not right. So I grab more of that blue, because this is drying, right? And the more it's drying, the more the paper, like the paint, I'm sorry, spreads, especially that I'm painting on a rough. But I do need some of these ripples here as close to the boat too. Not too much, because it can quickly get too busy. I'm gonna clean the brush, and when we come back, we will take care of the boat. Hi friends, welcome back. So now that the background is dry, the water is dry, let's start working on the boat. So I resketched just the sailboat, just so you can see the process without all that background that can get you a little confused. So I'm just gonna do it in a clean way, just the boat. The best approach is kind of like when I paint lamps, when I paint walls, any architectural pieces, my approach is actually wet on dry, and a lot of it is done with dry brushing because we need texture. And I found this technique to work best like on any pieces like that. It just makes it look more natural, more organic, instead of like trying to put it all together wet on wet, because that smoothness doesn't necessarily work on architectural pieces. So that's the thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, the best approach is actually to do this pretty quickly, paint it very fast, the boat, do it wet on dry for the most part, except for these parts. We're going to actually do that wet on wet first and then wet on dry. But let's start with the bottom part. So I have my round 8 golden wand brush. I'm actually gonna find one that have a finer point here. It is important to have a fine point on your brush because you'll be using that fine point. So if you ever get it brushed, like new brush, basically any new brush, take the cover off. But before you begin painting or doing anything, make sure you get rid of this gum arabic. All right, now I have a best point ever, right? Because it's super fine. So I'm going to slightly dip my brush in water, and I'm going to create my own shade of black. So I'm going to grab a little bit of indigo here, some of this Van Dyke brown, maybe some red already. There it is. So there's my blend. I don't know if I have enough color, so I'm just going to add a little more. I do need quite a bit of it. Here you go. All right, so this is my shade of black. So it's just a combination of different colors. And I want to have actually enough water too, because I need to create a fine, or not fine, but like consistent stroke here. So I just go like this. There's a lot of dry brushing involved. If you want this to be more bluish, then you add more blue to it. If you want this to be more reddish, you add more red. But shape it from each side here. The bottom here is reddish. So something like this. I'm just dry brushing through here. Doesn't have to be perfect. The more actually you do like leave these areas from dry brushing, the more natural it looks, the more organic it looks. So I just grabbed a little more paint. I'm gonna leave some of these spots the way they are. But here I do want this nicer line overall. So something like this. And now quickly before it's dry, I am going to grab this more like a milk-like Cretia, and this is my Perel red and Quin red. And right here, this is the part of the boat that's reddish. So a quick stroke to connect those parts of the boat. And that's pretty much it, but there's a little bit more of this kind of reddish tone here. So I'm gonna use this paint right there. I'm gonna clean the brush, clean it. And what we could do right away when we start painting that is grab more of that red and go on the bottom, because we are going to create these reflections on the water. And then we can grab our black again for these reflections. Maybe I went too far, but for the reflections, I'm gonna wanna have some of that shade of black right underneath as well. Now to have it, I don't actually want to do too dry brushing when I do these lines, so I will need to have way more paint on my brush, or more paint and water in general. So a little more of that Van Dyke brown, some red. There you go. So that's the boat, this part of the boat. So this is not done yet. Now I want to work with the grays, which would be like a yellow, blue, and red. I want to create a quick shade of gray. I have a class about this if you're not familiar with creating your own shade of gray. And it's just like with the tip of my brush, I want to show some of these parts of the boat. Now, because we already have background, it's going to be much easier to do a lot of it because it's just the background shaped parts of the boat already. So some parts here, some lines, not too much because we actually need to go towards these parts here, but I want to add a little more to it. Now, to paint these parts, so I am going to wet it first. Doesn't have to be wetted perfectly. So wet it. Because they are white, it's just that they're reflecting colors from the sea. There you go. And now I'm gonna grab this gray, but the main color is blue. So it's like a blue gray. And I'm just going to add it mostly toward the darkest areas that I see. Oops, I went way too far. So I'm just gonna have to reshape the fabric here. Okay, so I had to reshape the whole thing basically because I went too far, and I still went too far. All right, that'll be fine now. And then this part is a little darker right here. So like a thicker paint along that line there. And then let's grab a little bit of some brown with it. Everything is painted quickly. And then I'm going to clean the brush, and I'm going to do the same thing with this part right here. I'm going to try my best not to go over the lines because if you do, then the paint goes there too. Wet it first. And then the same colors. Although that feels even more like a yellowish tone. So I added more yellow with my red and blue. Again, I am going to attach the link or add the link in the post for those of you that are not familiar with creating your own shade of gray. Anything that's unclear, let me know because the chances are I already have a class about it. This is heavier ratio on the tip of my brush of just the indigo and some Van Dyke brown. And now I can go back here, but I also have to do the man sitting there. And then we'll come back for other parts. Now for the guy, let's grab the yellow, blue, gray, but mostly red, right? So it's a gray, but it's mostly red. And I'm just zooming in so you can see the person there sitting. Now it's just like spots. You're just finding spots. Nothing has to be perfect. It's just like a little shape of a person. You're just creating like a shape. He does have a sweatshirt, so I need to grab cream top. So that was like a water to milk like ratio, and now I'm grabbing this Van Dyke brown and indigo, and I'm just gonna add it toward the darkest areas. I have a little too much water here, and I tried to remove it, but just adding these colors already, even though it's spreading, it's already giving me like a shape of a person there. So whatever is the darkest, actually looks like two people, which is fine too. I'm actually gonna extend this part for the motor, and then since I have some paint, I'll use this up here. Once things dry, then you can add smaller accents. So I have this indigo and Van Dyke brown, so I'm just adding it like this, like towards some of the areas. So I'm going to zoom out. So there is really not much to it, right? When we paint the boat, everything is kind of dry brushing and it's done pretty quickly. And that's the idea. So if you've taken like the architectural classes with me where I was painting a doorknob, I was painting a padlock, like rusted padlock, I was painting some other windows, I was painting a wall with a window, a wall with a door. There's a lot of these kind of pieces, and it all kind of falls into the same category of painting these architectural pieces, doing the wet on dry and dry brushing. So very, very different compared to how I paint animals. Very, very different. So I'm just adding a little more of that yellow gray, and I'm gonna leave it the way it is. I'm gonna take a photo of it so you can see it, so you can study it. But it's the most important is to really go fast, because you don't need to go you don't need to create any details here. This is something that needs to be done fairly quickly. So I'm going to now move on to our main painting here. So we're going to paint this sailboat here. So this is done for now. So back to our class. We're gonna do the same thing. So grab milk-like ratio of Van Dyke Brown, bring it over here. There's my phthalo blue. I want this to be more like a milk-like ratio. Oops, there you go. And then my quinacridone red, way too much quinacridone red. I'm actually gonna grab more blues because now I have to. I have way too much of that quin red, that's okay. I'm gonna grab more of the Van Dyke Brown and add it all here. There's my black, right? So I don't want this to be too thick. I want this to be more like between water to milk, like ratio. Same thing as I just showed you in that example. I'm gonna wipe my brush a little on a towel. I wanna start by shaping this side of the boat. And again, like dry brushing will happen when you don't have enough paint water on your brush. So at the beginning here, I'm okay to not do too much dry brushing. I also use masking there for this part, but here I'm gonna start dry brushing because I wiped my brush on a towel. A little more of that paint. Leaving space on the bottom for the red. I actually covered the dry brushed areas and I regret that, but that's okay. Now I'm quickly going to grab that. This is quinacridone red, mostly Perel red. I don't want much paint on my brush again because I want to do this as dry brushing technique. And then the bottom again. There you go. I want more of that Perel red. So that's part of the boat now. Now I might as well keep going with this red toward these reflections, because I do need some of this red for the reflections. Now I'm gonna grab again the black that I created and blend it in here, but also start working on these reflections. So grab more like between water to milk, like ratio, so the ratio between water and paint. And just as you see these reflections, now I'm trying really hard because I did it differently in this example piece because there was no background. Here I really need to focus on what I see in the reference and how these reflections are going. So I don't want to do too much either, right? But I do want to show the red, that there's some red, and then we have this wet on dry. We're painting this part wet on dry. So I think I'm gonna stay with this. However, or stick with that. I want a little more of this black right on top. There you go. That's much better now. I'm gonna clean the brush. What else can I do, right? So as in the other piece, I started working up a little bit. So I'm gonna grab some of this Van Dyke brown and red and blue, all the colors basically. Just don't mix them too much on the palette, but on the paper. Let it mix on the paper, and then just to add colors here and there with the tip of your brush. Now, if you don't have a fine point, consider just using a smaller round brush. For example, you can use like a round 3 or round 2. because having a fine point is important. So I'm just kind of going here. This is where I place the masking fluid. So I'm just adding it there. But what I want to do is grab a little more of that red on the tip of my brush. Again, if you don't have a fine point on a round 8 or 6 that you're using, consider grabbing a smaller brush. I just grabbed a little bit of yellow too, and I'm just gonna go right here. This is where the person is sitting here. I just wanted a little color. Cleaning my brush, I'm gonna grab the 3 colors together with the majority of, mostly it's the quinacridone red, and just like before, I'm gonna add a little color toward the guy here, and let's see, just do spots. You're thinking spots, and then that black that I created could be black, or you can just use indigo with Van Dyke Brown. That's fine too. And it's just spots. So whatever you see the shirt, the black shirt, that's where you want to add it. Doesn't have to be perfect. We just need a shape of a person there. And it's all about these dots. I can come back to the person later. Right now, I'm fine with it the way it is. And then let's take care of this big piece. I need to zoom out a little bit. What we're gonna do, just like before, we're gonna wet it. Wet it. I guess the difference is the test piece was on a cold pressed, and this is on rough watercolor paper. If you've painted like on arches before, rough watercolor paper, then this one is very similar. And this is the collection. I don't use the collection cold pressed as much anymore because it does not feel like a cold press. It's hot. It's basically hot pressed. They changed everything about that paper that we loved, unfortunately. So now I'm doing everything almost on a rough watercolor paper, and I'm waiting for the Arches cold press to come in the mail. But anyway, I just wetted it. What I want is yellow, blue, red. So primary colors, but I need way more water. Yellow, red. I need this to be more like a milk-like ratio, and then my blue. I think more blue, because if you look at the reflections from the water, because these parts are very bluish actually. That's because of the water. So what I need to do is clean my brush, grab more of just the red and blue. I have the colors too mixed up. So I'm trying to grab like a cleaner version of the blue. And then a little bit of that yellow, just so we have a little bit of yellow as well. And then I'm gonna shape it. Well, last time in that test piece, I went a little too far, so I changed the shape of it. There you go. More of just like the blues. And actually, you know what? We used other blues too. We used like cobalt turquoise blue, cobalt, or the manganese blue nova I used. So I have to include these colors as well, because those colors, or these material pieces, these include or reflect the colors from the water. This is what happens when I'm really focused on painting and I have to talk at the same time. Sometimes I struggle a little bit when I'm really focusing on something like this, and I have to explain exactly what I'm doing. Well, I love it. It's just sometimes it's a little harder, I guess, to focus. So this part is done. I'm gonna kind of leave it, although I'm gonna grab a little thicker amount of that blue, red, yellow, more like a heavy cream, if I can find some more heavy cream on my palette, and then go right here next to this post, just so I have like a harder edge. And actually, with the tip of your brush, grab even indigo, just so you have like a darker spot right there, because these do need to be a little darker. All right, I'm gonna clean this brush, and then I'm gonna wet this part. So wet it. So remember, nothing has to be perfect. Nothing needs to be perfect. So wetting it and then applying colors wet on wet. This is more, I'd say, yellowish. So again, it's blue, yellow, red, right? But mainly it's the yellow. I need more yellow, so I just quickly grab more yellow. And then some of these blues as well. So it's like you're working with the primary colors constantly, yellow, blue, red, but you change the ratios between the three colors. Whatever the area needs to be more blue, then you add more blue. And now I grabbed also like the manganese blue nova and this other blue I used. And we also need to actually add the background here. I don't have the sky and water here in between. That's okay. So I'll work on it later. Now, one cool thing we could do is actually lift for these ropes in the middle. So I'm gonna use my Rigger 2 Songbird. If this is almost dry, it's actually too early. So I need to wait for this to settle a bit. We also have like some more reflections, I guess, on the water. So we can add some more reflections. So I'm just gonna have to zoom out a little more so you can see the whole thing. So what we could do, I was thinking, is add some of this wet on dry. So this is my Van Dyke brown and all the other colors I used to create that shade of black. Some red, brown, blue, and more like a water-like ratio. And then you can go like really close to this masking. So right in front of the, or on the right side of the masking. And it doesn't have to be like everywhere, like perfectly added paint, but if you go over the masking, you have that hard edge for sure. So let's see, what does it look like there? It looks like I could easily actually add some more reflections. That would not be a bad idea, but at first I'm gonna add a little more here. Looks like I could have some more reflections here. And then there would be reflections from the motor part of the boat. And then there's white parts, I don't want to cover that. Maybe some shadows, I can go back to the person. Add some more color. He does have a darker shirt. But what I want to do and show you how to do is actually lift these lines. So we have the ropes. So why not to grab the Rigger 2 and quickly, once you clean your brush, you go through and add these ropes. So you lift the collars through these sailboats or through this part, but you know what? You also need a collar to extend it so it looks like a rope. There you go. And then there's like small accents and lines and so on. We don't need to do everything exactly. But what I suggest actually is doing first is to finish the sky and the water behind, because I don't have that. So I need to work on it a little bit. So I'm gonna wait for this to settle a bit. And then I'll come back to it, because even this reflection is still wet, so I can't do anything quite yet. So I'm going to walk away for a few minutes and then come back. So now let's recreate some of that sky and water. So just like before, I'm just gonna wet it. I'll stop here just so the hard edge matches to the other parts. And I guess the same colors I used. So the blues, it's a little too intense, so I'm just gonna remove some of that paint. I just needed to match to what I have there. Which this part bottom should be with, I added a little more yellow and red and yellow and red, I think, to the blue. I'm just gonna clean my brush, use a damp brush to spread the paint. And then move on toward the bottom here. To purple, it's hard to match sometimes, so sometimes I prefer to actually do it all at once, but it's a smaller area anyway. Too much of the purple here. I'm gonna lift it a little bit. And then we have these parts in between. I'm actually gonna do this wet on dry. If you want to show some ropes, then don't cover everything, just kind of stay away from some of these ropes like that. And I think that's almost finished. Okay, I'll show you another thing we can do. So I thought about like adding these reflections. So actually we should work on it a little bit. So the reason I'm thinking we might as well do it is because these reflections on the right are a little darker. So I'm actually gonna use a softer brush, my long quill size 2. And just like I used yellow, red, and blue, I'm gonna do the same thing with the majority of the blue. There you go, that's like a purple. Perfect. And then the same thing, kind of like creating these reflections, right? If you wanted more purple, then grab more of the red and blue. So it all depends, right? What you see, how you see it, how you envision it. It's basically yellow, blue, and red. And these right here should be much thinner if you add any. And the same thing here, we should add just a little bit, but not cover too much because this side is much lighter anyway. And I think that's good, except we could add some darks on this side, make the reflection a little darker. So I just grabbed that black that I created. So no black out of a tube, just the black that I created, and just add it wet on wet this time, right side of the reflection. So before it's too dry. All right, I'm gonna clean the brush. We're not super done yet because we still have like smaller accents to do. Another thing what we need to work on is we need to actually remove masking fluid. So first, I want to show you something else we can do. So you want to grab the blue, yellow, red. How about like here? And then this is going to be dry brushing. And I grabbed too much of the water and paint just to add a little bit of that, the way the wind is folding it or pushing it. You want to sometimes show it. Something like that, maybe just on the bottom. I don't want to cover these lifted lines. We did kind of this one, but I would just lift again, just so we have another color. Or layer, I should say. So you can add that. Then using a smaller brush, I have Rigger 2. I'll grab this milk to water like ratio. And then I can add like, maybe there's a rope here actually. Some lines, ropes, actually that was wet. Shouldn't have gone there. Let's see. Little line here. Here you go, just some smaller accents. I think that's enough probably. So all I have to do left, like all I have left to do is to actually remove the masking fluid for watercolors, and then the painting is done. So I'm gonna walk away from it, let it dry, and then remove the masking. While we're waiting for this to dry a little bit, I was thinking, why don't we add some birds? So why don't we add some birds to our painting? I have my round 0 songbird. I'm gonna grab this thicker paint. And I want to kind of like dry brush almost. So you can have it very light actually, because it doesn't have to be indigo. You can just use like the browns. I'm gonna grab more like a shade of brown. As long as there's not enough paint on my brush, this will feel more like dry brushing. I can wipe my brush on a towel too. So wipe your brush on a towel a little bit if it's too much, and then you're just recreating some of these birds. So when you do some of this dry brushing while painting birds, that will give it also like a more natural look. So you see, like, because I'm dry brushing and my brush feels kind of dry, it's like it separates, like the fibers separate, and it's easier a little bit to create a bird. So it just depends how many birds. The ones in the background would definitely be tiny. So I kind of like the composition already, so I'm gonna leave it the way it is. And again, we're pretty much done with it. The only thing we have to do is just remove masking fluid for watercolors. Hi friends, welcome back. So everything is dry, so I'm going to go ahead and remove masking. This is the pickup cement eraser. And let's see, I'm gonna start removing all this masking fluid. Everything needs to be dry before you even decide to, okay, it's time to remove masking. You need to make sure everything is 100% dry. Otherwise, you're gonna tear up your paper. All right, my friends, I think that's pretty finished. Like the painting is finished, so there's no need to add any more to it. Of course, you can create some thinner lines for the ropes if you want to, but I feel like my painting is complete, like it's finished, and this is my test piece. So you have a different version, I guess, for these parts, but you can take a look at it, all of it. I will have photos of both of my paintings attached to the main post. So just let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for your time.